webinar. So Peter Brereton is an English for liberal arts instructor at International Christian University in Tokyo and a freelance teacher trainer for Cambridge University Press. He is also a Delta local tutor and external assessor. He's been involved in English language teaching since 2007 and has worked in a range of English contexts in countries including Spain, Australia, Ireland, the UK, Latvia, and France. Peter has a CELTA, Delta, and an MA in TESOL, and is currently a doctoral student at the University of Warwick. As a teacher, he's passionate about classroom spontaneity and teacher responsiveness, as well as collaboration with peers. His current research interests include student experiences of English medium instruction, as well as the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on both students and teachers. So at this point, I'll hand you over to Peter.
Hi everyone, I'll just turn that on so that you can see, and so that I can see as well. Just a second. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone around the world. It's lovely but slightly intimidating to see such a fantastic turnout of over 1,000 people now, I think. One of the wonderful things about these kind of conferences is that they can bring together people from all over the world. And despite the different contexts that we work in, one thing that I'm learning about through this pandemic is that we do belong to a real global community. And I think if one positive comes out of it, it's that we know that it is possible to bring people together for events like this. So thank you all for making the time to attend this talk. And thanks also to Cambridge University Press, and in particular Simon and the team for arranging this all. If you attended any of the talks yesterday or Gregory's talk this morning, you'll know how excellent the conference has been so far. And I do feel under a little bit of pressure to meet the high standards that have been set by the other presenters. So without any further ado, let me introduce myself a little bit more. As Simon said, my name is Peter Brereton, and my talk today is based on my belief that students, and particularly EAP students, should be helped to develop as reflective practitioners. Now, I'm using the term reflective practitioners instead of just reflection, because I think that reflection is a label that's given to lots of activities that we do in class, but which aren't often truly reflective in nature. And I'll tell you a little bit about that, what I mean by that in a few minutes. Now, in this presentation, I'm going to tell you a little bit about a project that I've been carrying out with my students since April this year. And although this project might not be feasible in your own courses, I do encourage you to consider whether some of the similar principles or the similar ideas may be possible in your own contexts. So first of all, I'll just tell you a little bit more about where I work myself. As Simon said, I work at what's called the International Christian University out in the west of Tokyo. And I work on the English for Liberal Arts program, which is often called the ELA program. This deals with mainly first-year students and mainly Japanese students. And we prepare them to deal with a Japanese-English bilingual university education. The three main aims of that are English for academic purposes, with a strong emphasis on critical thinking skills, in part because it's a liberal arts university, and also with the aim of developing students' academic study skills and long-term learning habits. And it's kind of with that final point in mind that I decided to target reflection with this project. Now the project, the inspiration for the project came from a few sources really. First of all, I was in observations of teachers that I've carried out and in activities that I've seen in textbooks, and yes, of course, in my own lessons as well, I'm often underwhelmed and a little bit frustrated by the kind of rushed simplification of student reflection. So everything that's written about teacher development really stresses and emphasizes the need for reflection. But I feel that sometimes with students, we just neglect this. So what do I mean by rushed? Well, I think it fills a couple of minutes at the end, with a reflective task of like, what did you do well? What could you improve in that activity? Or even like a quick checklist where students just tick what they did well and what they could improve. But I think that's simplistic, and I think that's inauthentic. We know that teacher reflection is complex and that it takes time to develop as an effective reflective practitioner, but we don't really afford the same time to students. Now, we're all busy, and we have lots and lots of things to cover with our students, but I do feel like reflection is a really important thing that EAP students need. I think that teachers do see reflection as disposable or a kind of non-essential aspect of a course. And what I mean by that is if you're short on time in a lesson, I think the post-activity kind of reflection task is the first thing that we decide to cut. And I think that students do understand the teacher's priorities and the value that we place on the different aspects of the course. And if teachers don't seem fully committed to an idea, then the students don't really engage in it as much. Another reason why I think it's important to consider student reflection is the ongoing pandemic and the traumatic time that we're experiencing at the moment. Now, I don't think it's overblown or exaggerated to say that we are living through traumatic times. Rice and Groves' definition of trauma is an exceptional experience in which powerful and dangerous events overwhelm a person's capacity to cope. I don't think anyone could disagree that this is an exceptional experience, that there are powerful and dangerous events occurring around us. And there's so much going on that I think for one's own well-being and mental health, it's never been more important for teachers or for students to take the time to reflect and really to attempt to better understand the experiences that we're having. My third inspiration was my own reflective project with a fellow teacher. Now, this is for the past for the past 6 months. This has been set to the backdrop of emergency remote teaching and obviously the pandemic. But with one of my colleagues who's based in Austria, we engage in hour-long conversations every other week. And this is a kind of collaborative autoethnography, but it's also very reflective. And I've collaborated with a number of teachers on this kind of reflective project in recent years. And it's always led to greater understandings of my own experiences as an educator, my own kind of identity and my beliefs as a teacher, and a better understanding and a better awareness of my own classroom practices. Plus, it's just really enjoyable, it's really therapeutic, and it's a great way to develop relationships with colleagues as well. So because I really value these kind of projects for myself and for my own reflection and for my own well-being as well, I did want to replicate the same thing for my students. Now, on the slide here, you can see that I've written my burning question. And this idea comes from Anne Burns, who often uses this as an inspiration for action research. And for me, the burning question in this project was, how can I help my students engage in sustained, effective, and meaningful reflection? So I'm going to explain a little bit more about the project itself now. And I'll start off by telling you how I introduced it to my students. Initially, I gave the students a bit of an explanation using a presentation of the format of the project and the purpose of the project. Mainly, it involved telling students why reflection is important and how being a reflective learner can really benefit their time at university. In addition to that, I also provided training and practice in principles of cooperative development, as it says on the screen there, which are taken from Julian Edge's book on cooperative development. This really was because it's widely agreed that effective reflection for teachers needs training. And I think it therefore follows that students are likely to need training even more than teachers if they're going to reflect effectively. Now, at my workplace, I run a reflective practice group for teachers, and we use principles of cooperative development to encourage meaningful reflection. So I thought this was a really good model for the student project. It was, I think, particularly important for students because I didn't want them to treat it just like another conversation or just having a chat with another student. So I introduced these principles and we practiced them in class. So what I mean by these principles is the idea of defined speaker and listener roles. So if one person's speaking, the other person is listening, and it's not an interactive discussion or conversation like that. This is particularly important because it can help the speaker, as this quote from O'Leary says, it can help the speaker to be compelled to make sense of their own ideas and their own reflections. And this can help them to clarify their beliefs and their values in their own minds. Julian Edge kind of emphasizes this when he talks about the astonishing power of the listener. And he said that speakers who are well listened to consistently report that listening has a positive effect on the quality and the quantity of what they have to say, as well as facilitating effect on their thinking and an enhancement of their self-worth. So this kind of idea of speaker and listener roles, I had to kind of really emphasize to the students, you're not here to offer advice to your partner. You're there to listen to your partner. Don't interrupt. And as a listener, it can be quite difficult, quite counterintuitive, I think, not to make suggestions or to try to relate your ideas to the speaker's story, relating those ideas to your own experiences or sharing kind of suggestions that you might have. But it's really important to allow the speaker to talk through their own ideas. I did allow questions to encourage reflection. So instead of saying, oh, you know what, you should probably, when they're trying to make a suggestion, they could say something like, oh, so how do you think that you can solve that problem? And ask the speaker to develop their own ideas in their own mind. The questions for clarifying obviously came when things were unclear. The final thing that I stressed to the students was that it's okay not to know the answers. They don't need to answer the questions immediately. It's okay to pose a question without really knowing the answer. And it's okay to say, I don't know.
Peter, very sorry to interrupt. Do you think you could up the volume a little bit? There's a few comments that people can't hear you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Talking about the, where was I? The project format, is that better? I'm not sure if I've changed anything there.
Yeah, just as loud as you can, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, all right. All right, I'll see if that's, oh yeah, I'll try and speak up. The next thing that I'll move on to is the format of the project that I carried out. Now this, over a 10-week term, I split it into 5 themes of 2 weeks each. Over the 10 weeks, that involved 5 tasks. The first one was based on the beginnings of university life. Secondly, we talked about learning online. Thirdly, was about motivation and well-being. Fourthly, was a free choice where the students could choose from a number of different topics that I suggested, but also they were able to take a topic that they might be interested in. And finally, we talked about the end of term reflections. In the first week of each task, the students were required to write a reflective journal. And I think this is maybe the most common form of reflection, where I think people like Richards and Farrell have often discussed the benefits of reflective journals for teachers. So I gave students prompts for reflection, and I asked them to write for about 45 minutes on that topic. In the second week, they arranged with their partner to meet for around 45 minutes to discuss and to develop the journal reflections. So in this way, the journal was acting as a kind of preparation, so the students could initially kind of think of their ideas and then develop them in the discussion. After the discussion happened, they were required to write a short summary of the discussion and then a reflection on how they developed their ideas and how and what they'd learned through dialogue. This was largely a self-directed project, which they had to submit at the end of term. So I used Google Docs, and the students were worked through a template that I created. And because it was assigned via Google Classroom, it meant that I could check their progress and I could leave comments when necessary. The main aims of the project were for the students to develop. So Mann and Walsh said that there were 3 requirements for teacher development. There needs to be a focus, a dialogue with a peer, and reflection. And in that sense, I think it should be no different for students. Students need a focus, they need a dialogue with a peer, and they need reflection. I also wanted them to understand on a more deeper level their experiences that they were going through. I wanted them to have a better appreciation of their learning experiences and their lived experiences, as well as their evolving identities and beliefs. My aim here was really twofold. First of all, to help students understand the academic experiences that they were going through, but also the experiences that they were experiencing during the pandemic as well. These things are both landmarks in their lives, both events they've never experienced before, and both things that really generate a whirlwind of emotions. And I thought it was really important that students were able to reflect on this effectively. I also thought it was really important for students to collaborate because they were all in their own homes, quite isolated at times, I think. So I wanted students to be, I wanted to reduce the sense of isolation. I wanted them to interact with other students and to engage with them. Obviously, Vygotsky and lots of other people have written about how social interaction is vital to individual development. And I've taken this from Sawyer, but that basically collaboration can help to create a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think the students definitely felt that as well. I also wanted the students to pause, to stop and to think about what was going on. Now, this might seem time consuming, but it has a really positive impact on reflection and on development. And I wanted to make that part of the course. We often travel at 100 miles an hour when we're teaching these courses. And I just wanted them to stop and to think about things a little bit more deeply. And long term, I wanted to instill in them a habit of reflection. Now, this quote is from Grayling, and he says that the best thing that any education can bequeath is the habit of reflection and questioning. And I really wanted, as a long-term aim, to develop students as reflective practitioners. With any project, it's important to consider the potential issues. My first issue, as I mentioned before, was the time commitment, but it can't be rushed. We know that for teachers to become reflective practitioners, they need time. So instead of sidelining reflection in my course, I decided to incorporate it and make it a central theme. The second issue that I found was that the reliance on a peer could be problematic. Any project that relies on collaboration could be. Now I countered this by emphasizing that students should contact me if they had any problems with their peer at all. And it hasn't been a problem so far, but I think it's really worth planning for. One of my students did drop out of my course in spring, but he told me himself, and I decided to rearrange the groups a little bit so there was a 3-way collaboration for the final few tasks. Some of my students did say that they would appreciate switching up the partners so they could meet more people, but that really wasn't the aim of this project. The aim was for them to reflect more efficiently. And I value the continuity, so they can build up the trust with one peer rather than talking to many different ones. Something that was unexpected for me was that students mentioned that managing a term-long project was quite difficult. And it never really occurred to me, but these students were very used to short-term deadlines. and some of them struggled to manage the fact that they weren't submitting their assignment on a weekly basis. However, I think this is a really challenging but valuable experience for the students, and it's something that they'll need to do with increasing regularity as they progress through university. I reminded them regularly in class that their homework included that task, and I really encouraged them to do the tasks on a weekly basis rather than leaving anything and letting them build up over a couple of weeks. I was using Google Classroom, which also meant that I was able to check their progress and I could leave comments on their ideas and encourage them and to show a little bit of oversight as well. I also think that having a peer helped them. The slight kind of positive peer pressure that they had acted as a reminder that they had to do these tasks. With any reflective project, we need to be aware of the idea of fake reflection. And again, I don't believe this was an issue for me, but it certainly could be, especially if you have demotivated students or if they don't manage the tasks on a weekly basis. There were definitely some instances for me when students spent time chatting instead of reflecting. For example, they would write summaries about how they talked about music. But I think that's inevitable, and I think it needs to be tolerated, as it was actually a really useful tool for students to develop rapport with each other and a bit of trust with their peer. However, providing teachers with the conditions and opportunities to reflect is often the biggest challenge for teacher development. And if we provide students with the training, with the correct opportunity and the correct conditions, then I think they should be able to reflect as well. Now, the final thing for an EAP course, it's important to consider how we grade these things. But how do you assess reflection? Now, I didn't think it was fair for me to be judging people's reflection based on summaries that they wrote. So instead of that, I focused on task completion, not on the quality of the reflection. And I trusted that if the student did the tasks, and if they completed the summaries and the reflections, that they would benefit from the reflection itself. So I graded the task completion based on the time they spent on the tasks, which you can check on Google Docs, and also on the kind of apparent effort that they put into the summaries, then the reflections and their journal entries. And if something wasn't really good enough, I left a comment encouraging them to give me more information. Now I'd like to give you some of the reflections that students had. So I've cherry-picked a few quotes to show you today. I'd really like to go into detail on what the students thought about their topics that they discussed, online learning and motivation and well-being and things. But I think I'll have to save that for another time. Instead, I'm going to focus on the process that the students went through. And I've taken some quotes fairly verbatim from their journals and from their reflective tasks to show you what they thought of the process itself. Now, some of these are quite long, but they are included to illustrate the quality of their reflections. So this student said that having to write down thoughts on paper meant that they needed to consider it more seriously. And he thought this was a good thing, and he understands his beliefs and ideas better now. The next one is a bit longer, but he says that the journal is beneficial, but, and I think that what's important is the second bit, if there were only writing journal tasks, there would be many points which I would never notice. Talking, being asked questions, and answering the questions are very helpful for me to deepen and develop my ideas. This student said that talking to her partner means that it allows her to have a deeper discussion and exchange many interesting ideas. And I think it's great that she says, I would never think of these things without working with my partner. So she sees the benefit of the collaboration there. Another student mentioned that she became a better listener as a result of the project. She was able to develop her own thoughts more profoundly by asking questions, by having my ideas improved, listening to others' opinions, and thinking everything objectively. So there's kind of critical thinking coming there as well, I think. Another student said that the benefits of listening really helps him to come up with things by himself. Taking the time to consider things we've learned and talk about them are very fruitful. And one more said that thanks to my partner's questions, I noticed one of my weak points. I often tend to think too often, or I may tend to stop thinking too often, sorry, by saying it depends on the situation. And this may be true, but now I think I should think deeper and wider. For example, I should think about how different people see things and how experiences are different for each one and myself. And the final quote about the process was the habit of questioning oneself. Now, this student said that the best thing in this week's discussion seemed to me that both of us asked questions not only about each other's ideas, but we also asked about our own ideas, unlike previous discussions. And I think it's great that they're starting to question their own work and their own beliefs and their own experiences, not only asking their peer for some ideas. Now, a little bit about the experiences that the student went through in spring and also in the autumn term. I found that there were some experiences where they said that they appreciated the little things. So this student said that even though I've had a class with my partner for 10 weeks in spring, we've never really spoken together. At the end, he said, I'm happy because I'm talking to you. And I realized I need to appreciate more small things happening in my life. In contrast, the student said, today's talk was so interesting. We could reconsider the current circumstances deeply about how we should spend our time in the expansion of coronavirus and how we should lead our lives for the next 4 years. I think this was the most active discussion I've ever had in the Duo project. The students called this the Duo project for some reason. There was also a greater sense of others. This student wrote that she often gets worried when other people in the class don't communicate, and she wondered why they weren't active in discussions. But by talking to her partner, she realized it's not because they're lazy, it's just because they're shy or not very confident. In contrast, this student talked about how communicating with other people, she can see herself from another point of view and find the answers to her own questions. On a similar note, this student said that the project has helped him to rethink how different we all are and how we see things differently, which again I think is really beneficial for critical thinking. This one's a bit longer, but I think it's a very important topic. This student said that her and her partner both felt strong stress, physically and mentally. And I think what's important here is she said, we questioned, are we spending time at university balanced healthily in a way we consider? And the answer was no. We spend too much time with laptops and we always have stress because of assignments. On a similar note, I felt very sorry for the student when I read this, but she said, I often feel nervous before we start Zoom lessons, and my room has become a room that I feel nervous in. Talking to my partner has made me feel a little bit more comfortable in class, and I know that other people feel the same as me. And I really think that that shows the power of being able to talk to people and to interact with other students when they're not so isolated anymore. And another one that was quite difficult to read was that this student said that for the past 2 weeks, she was always tired and she slept on the floor when she came home and she had no energy. And she felt this burden and she felt guilty for not working harder. However, thanks to the discussion with her partner, she felt like she could forgive herself a little bit. So is it possible that these feelings were already existing? I think absolutely it is. But I think that the students have been able to better articulate these ideas through this reflective project. And it does sound like, at least for the last 2 examples, that they've definitely benefited from talking to a partner. Now, just to finish now, I think it's really important for teachers and for students that we expect progress but not perfection. We do expect and accept that students might discuss lighter topics and do a little bit of small talk And a few students mentioned that after heavy discussions about topics like well-being and mental health, they did enjoy talking about lighter topics the following week. And I accepted that. I think that they're benefiting from the reflective project itself. But effective reflection does take time and it takes dedication. The whole process is time consuming, but it's worth it. And if possible, the idea of introducing collaboration and communication does enrich the process. And especially nowadays in this current, in the ongoing pandemic that we're facing. Just to finish with 2 quotes from students. This student said that she spends so much time at home now that she feels a little bit alone and isolated. After she finishes talking to her partner, however, she always has lots of energy. She feels happy and she has lots of ideas in her mind. I enjoy the afterglow of our discussions and the feeling of thinking deeply. And I love that idea of the afterglow of discussion. I think it really shows that this project was worthwhile for this student. And finally, this student, again, was quite difficult to read. She said that she doesn't really feel like a university student at the moment. We have the classes, but we miss the other experiences of students' lives. She actually cites something that she read in a required reading for the course, where the author says, the classroom puts ideas in your head and the dorm room makes them part of your soul. And then she finishes by saying, in this unusual situation, I wonder how fantastic it will be, the time when we can assemble to learn together in the same classroom and dorm room. With that, I'll finish and turn over if anybody has any questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks a lot for that. There's a lot of good comments, a lot of comments and questions around this. And yeah, it's quite powerful. A lot of the quotes we were seeing there. So yeah, let me just start. I mean, as you said before, we do tend to rush through life, through education, through everything, and just taking that time to sit and think in whatever we do really is going to be beneficial, I think. So first question from I think Hale or Halle. Can you clarify the nature of the talk / exchange between the students? Is it a discussion between the 2 students, a reflective dialogue, ? At the beginning of the presentation, you said about the reflection was described as a non-interactive task.
Right. It was I think the best thing to do to talk about cooperative development again, that it is collaborative in that they are listening to each other and encouraging each other. In my own experiences of these kind of these interactions, I suppose, they're only interactive in the sense that you're not having a chat about something, but you're allowing the other person to talk. In the reflective practice group that I manage with the other teachers at my university, we always start off by having these very strict collaborative, cooperative development principles. And we say, you're the speaker, you're the listener. Now we're going to change, you're the speaker and you're the listener. But they always end up descending into a kind of discussion. And I think that was definitely evident with the students as well, that I really encourage them to think of it not as a chat and not as a discussion of something, but as a way to reflect with somebody listening to you. But it was definitely evident that they were discussing their topics as well.
Great. A couple of around the sort of structure of this. Jacqueline asks, how can we make the reflective process structured? And there's something else here. Should a teacher provide guide questions for reflection or just allow students' ideas to flow freely?
I created I think, I don't know how much was heard. I'm really sorry if it was a bit quiet. I do provide the students with prompts for each task. So I provided them with a Google Doc template that was about, I think it was 10 pages long because it was 1 page for every task. And the idea was that the prompts were there to encourage their reflection, but they were also free to kind of to go away from those prompts a little bit if they wanted to. So in that sense, I tried to structure it within reason, I thought, because I think there's some things that occur, especially nowadays, things that we can't control, and it might be that students really want to reflect about something that's ongoing in their own lives, and I don't want to force them to reflect about a particular topic. But I did provide a number of prompts for each task that the students did, and I think most of them, from what I remember, most of them tended to stick within the parameters of those prompts.
I could hear you at the beginning. Terribly sorry to interrupt. I hate doing that, but there was a number of comments saying could be a little
Great.
bit louder, but I hate interrupting. I'm sorry for that. So another question here. Interested to know why you thought it wasn't a good idea to mix up the groups. Wouldn't this encourage reflective practices even further?
I think it's something that I might try next term, because the feedback from the students was that they wanted to talk to other people. My idea initially was just that if you've got one partner, there's a certain continuity there, and you can build trust with that person, and you can recall things that you talked about last week, and you can have running themes through your own reflections. And I thought that would be really beneficial. But I think it would be really interesting to see how mixing up the students might be also really beneficial as well.
Another one here, we've still got a bit of time, this is good. How can a teacher create ownership for peer reflection as different students may be invested in the process at different levels?
That's a good question. I think I'm really fortunate that I have extremely motivated students who were willing to try things. And I think that the initial training that I gave them, I mean, I called it training. It was more of like trying to sell the idea of reflection to them and make sure that they were on board. By giving them this kind of document to work through, I encourage them to kind of personalize that and to take ownership of it in that sense. But I think it's not really something that we can force students to do, is it? And it's a really good question that.
Another quickie, actually, this might be easier. How long did the project take to set up?
It was very quick in terms of writing the prompts for the tasks. Didn't take long. I had a good idea that at the beginning they should look forward to the term ahead. I wanted them to talk about online learning. I wanted them to reflect on their motivation and on their well-being as well. And obviously at the end of the term, it's quite easy to reflect back on the term that you've just experienced. So the topics themselves were not too difficult. And then the prompts came quite quickly as well. On top of that, there was the principles and things like that I introduced in the first few lessons. That didn't take long because I'd already done similar things with teacher training programs. So it was quite easy just to kind of lift things from other PowerPoints that I'd already created.
Excellent, thank you. Another question here, could you tell us if there was a process to pair the students, language level, gender, or so on, in order to carry out the project?
I tried to mix genders as much as I could. That wasn't always possible, but I did try to avoid too many same gender groups. I didn't know the students at the beginning, and it was a little bit of it was random, but I did have, for example, I had one student who was very, her father was American, and so she was very fluent at English and very proficient, I think. And I thought it might be intimidating to be paired with her if your English level wasn't as high as that. Mm-hmm. So I grouped her with somebody else that in the first few lessons I thought, wow, he seems very confident. He seems like he wouldn't be kind of overawed by this kind of level of English. And it didn't seem like they were. And then I put together other students, if they seemed a little bit quieter, I tended to put them together as well. But a lot of it was very rough because I didn't know the students very well at the beginning.
I think we've got time for one final one. This is great. We've had lots of questions, loads of questions coming in. So kind of final question, how do you recommend to incorporate reflection in the classroom? Is it in the last few minutes at the end of the class, or should it be a whole lesson be dedicated to this regularly? What's the kind of structure and timings that you would recommend for incorporating this?
So with this class, maybe it's best to talk about before this project. Before the project, I often had reflection times at the end, kind of like 10 minutes, but sometimes 10 minutes became 5 minutes or 3 minutes or kind of 2-minute quick reflections. And I never felt good doing that. It didn't feel like it was very fruitful for the students, and it did feel like a bit of lip service to reflection, really. I did also do kind of, in the middle of a term, I do like a 15-minute reflection on how the term's going in class. And at the end of course as well, I would do the same kind of thing. And that was always following speaker and listener principles as well. This term and last term, since I started this project, in the first few lessons, obviously, like I said, I explained the principles of cooperative development to the students. And then I felt it was a lot easier, because I'd given them that initial training, it was a lot easier in class to say, let's just reflect on that, what we've read now. You've got a few minutes to think about it, and now you're going to share your ideas. And I felt like just talking about reflection in that sense was, it kind of led to, it felt like it led to deeper reflections, or that they understood what I meant when I said reflect. It doesn't just mean chat about it. It actually meant think about it and then discuss it, or kind of express your ideas. So I think it really depends how much time you've got and how many other things you've got going on in the class.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you can make time for it, I think it really does. The training at the beginning, I think, was really useful for my students.
I expect this is an ongoing process as well. It's not something that you can, easily say, do this, this, and this. I suppose
Right.
it's evolving, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think some people pick it up faster than others. Like the question about kind of ownership as well. Some people seem to kind of buy into it very quickly, and others don't. But like with anything, you want to bring most of them with you when you're teaching, I think.
Yeah. You can't please everybody. Right. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Peter. That's kind of all we have time for. But